Hello students, we are back for our third part of wet blending. This is coming back to you another day after. And so here is our final image with the setup here. So we'll go ahead and get started. Palettes up on the top left and painting is here on the right. So I'm starting off by mixing some neutral color. If you look, I'm trying to paint in the parts down at the bottom. You can see the little brass hangers that sit on my palette, and they kind of hide a little spot. So I thought I would go through and try to paint those back in. I shifted my painting slightly to the right before trying to paint those in. The funny thing is when I get to the end of the painting, I realized my value wasn't very good. So in the end, if I were to make this into a nice painting, I would probably paint over that. So here we go. We are going to start with our scumble now. This is the part where we're going to drag the white paint across the surface of the canvas. So we're going to just barely pull that very lightly across the surface. I'm starting with the fish because it's the brightest and the lightest thing in my painting. It's right up front. I'm also going to hit some of the highlights on the bottle. Those are also very, very bright and reflective. So I'm working in the tail here. And so the idea of scumbling and what we want to try to do is pull the paint across the surface. I'm not trying to really like scrub my brush back and forth, back and forth. I'm trying to just lightly pull some paint across the surface to put down some paint up on the peaks of the canvas texture, but not down in the valleys. So it's a very good technique for doing things that are going to make highlights and that are also going to make very bright opaque paint. So I'm kind of using the drawing underneath and I'm slowly building some more highlights and whites into this fish-shaped salt shaker here. Working across down onto the fin here, pulling up from the high bright areas and out and away. And what you usually are doing is maybe putting a little more pressure at the very beginning of a stroke and then kind of pulling away from the canvas as you finish a stroke to get that variation. And as you pull away, what you end up doing is you end up giving a nice kind of light, you get the grain of the canvas by pulling away. So it's got a nice kind of texture to it. So this is again called a scumble, and we'll use this quite a bit. I'm putting some more little highlights or like reinforcing them on top of the number 3 or backwards letter E. And we're going to go and switch over now. So now we are looking at building up, I think, our glazing. So in this area, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a lot of paint or a little bit of paint with a lot of medium. So you're trying to almost put like a glass layer of medium on top of things. And you'll see how this 7 is slowly getting darker. It's a little bit warmer because the paint is thinner. So when you do that, it does tend to get a little bit warm. So I'm going through and getting on top of that part of the painting, and then I'll move over and start looking at making parts of the bottle itself darker. So I'm using maybe a little bit more paint at this point, but it's also mixed with a lot of medium. And when you mix it with the medium, it is going to dry pretty quickly, pretty much overnight. Maybe not the same day, but overnight. And the idea is when I put down a glaze, it makes things darker. It adds a deeper value because your eye has to see the light after it bounces through the glaze to the painting, back through the glaze, back out to your eye. And so it gives you a very, very deep and rich color. And you can use a darker color. You can use all kinds of colors. The letter E there on the left side is actually blue. So I could turn around and use a blue and make that get to that color through a glaze as well. But not for this project. We'll do that later. So I'm kind of accenting a lot of the shadow areas, trying to redraw a little bit. I can find a nice crisp edge if I need to. I can fan this out because there's a lot of medium and just a little bit of paint. I can kind of feather it. I can kind of smear it around a little bit. But mostly I'm trying to put this over the entire bottle. The purpose for this also is that because it is like glass and it is oily and reflective, it ends up giving me more of a glass look to the bottle. And it definitely really darkens the value on that. So I've got my shadows underneath things, and then I'm going to slowly start working my way up nearer to the top. Here we go, kind of looking at that shoulder and starting to kind of scumble that or spread that around. I painted a really light area up there, so I'm going to kind of leave any wet paint alone. I'm avoiding wet painted areas. I'm only adding this to the dry painting areas. So I'll leave the highlight alone. I'll leave a lot of the other areas alone completely so that I can just go through and try to darken those areas and make them feel like they are shinier. So just pulling around, pulling that paint, trying to fill it all in. And you'll see definitely parts that are a little bit more streaky. And I'll let that sit for a minute. It'll dry out a little bit. And then I can kind of go back to it and maybe pull my strokes in a different direction to try and make it feel a little more even and try and make it feel slightly more like glass, like it's just a different value on that glass reflective bottle. All right, so looks like I'm still going. And I think at this point, I'm starting to think about that letter 3. And I want it to, letter E or number 3. I wanted to make the side a little bit darker. Felt like that was too strong. So then I used my rag to kind of clean it up a little bit. And I thought, okay, well, let's put that same treatment to all 3 of those vertical sides on the right. So I'm adding in the extra glaze, and then I'll take my rag and just kind of pull it up a little bit so that it's a little more even and looks a little bit nicer. So then I'm going to go and push some of those dark shadows a little bit more, clean up that edge a little bit more. And then I can see some areas where I can go a little bit extra dark in the glass bottle. So I'm adding some of those extra dark notes. So this is pretty much just pure straight paint. So I'm adding extra paint on top of the glaze and letting that kind of get into the painting. So that's going to give me an extra rich, extra dark value and kind of look to that. You know, and having those darks of that glass bottle up next to the edge of the fish is going to make that really pop. You're going to get a lot of volume from that. Here I'm going to kind of make a little bit of a highlight, a little reflection inside of that lower portion so that it's not all just one dark black brown shape. I'm kind of adding little notes all over, cleaning off my brush, squeezing some of that out because I had added some white into it. Want a clean brush when I'm trying to glaze. You don't want to really mix too much light opaque paint into a glaze if you have one. Mostly you want pure color, and it can be very thinned out with medium like Neo Mag or something else, but you usually don't want to get a bunch of opaque white paint or yellow paint or red paint into it. It can make your color end up looking a little cloudy or hazy. So usually you want your glaze, you know it's going to make something darker, so you want it pretty pure so that it can get a nice tone to whatever you're adding it on top of. Kind of looking at trying to paint in that whole shoulder on the bottle. playing around with that just a little bit. I notice that I'm evening out these tones on this upper area. I think I even added a little bit of white to that to kind of make it a little bit, somewhere in between, trying to get like a nice even tone to it. I think by the end, the bottle looks pretty decent. Not the best bottle I've ever painted, but it definitely has like solid values. It groups together really well, value-wise. So here I've got a little bit of the middle value, and I'm adding this to the background because what I'm trying to do is I don't want the background value to be the same as the ground plane. So I figured I would go through and add these in, get those kind of painted in, and then I'm going to wipe some away with my rag again to try and just even it out a little bit. And I think it works pretty good where it's a little bit lighter at the bottom and then it gets darker as it goes up to the top. So I'm kind of pulling away from the canvas as I pull that rag up. And there we go. And I think in the end, I'm going to start to also tone this front edge here. Here I go, of the letter E here. It's just a little bit, felt like the top plane and the side plane looked like the same value. So I'm going through and trying to even that out and just add a little bit darker value to the side plane, thinking that the light is not hitting that as directly as it was the other plane. And so that'll help to kind of differentiate top from left side from right side. I think I bumped the camera pretty good somewhere in here on accident. I'm sure you'll see it. Maybe it was just the palette camera, not the actual big camera. I think we're about here to the end where I kind of leave this off and pretty much say we're done with this one. All right, so on the left here, you have the end of day 1, and on the right, you have the end of day 2. Enjoy your painting. Good luck.